She walked in like the whole world belonged to her. A girl no older than 19, designer handbag in her hand, diamond bracelet catching the courtroom lights, and an expression that could freeze anyone who dared to question her. Her name was Ava Harrington, daughter of billionaire real estate mogul Charles Harrington, a name that echoed across every luxury tower in New York. But today, none of that mattered. Not here. Not in front of Judge Frank Caprio. Ava didn't sit quietly like most people. She marched to the defendant's podium with a confidence that didn't belong to someone facing a violation. Her heels clicked sharply with each step, as if announcing, "Make way. I'm important." Judge Caprio observed her carefully, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the defiance in her posture, and the storm hiding behind her eyes. He greeted her with his familiar warmth. "Good morning. And you are?" Ava didn't smile, didn't soften, didn't even look nervous. Instead, she tilted her chin upward and said the words that made the entire room stiffen. "Do you know who I am?" A ripple of disbelief moved through the courtroom. People exchanged glances, some whispering under their breath. Even Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change. He simply folded his hands, calm as a quiet shore. Ava continued, her voice sharp with entitlement. "You should. My father." She stopped, as if the name alone held power. "He's Charles Harrington. I don't think I need to explain more." Judge Caprio studied her, but not the way she expected. Not with intimidation. Not with admiration. But with something she wasn't used to. Understanding. Her confidence faltered for half a second, just enough for a careful observer to notice. Then she crossed her arms. "I'm sure we can make this go away," she added, trying to sound casual, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, voice gentle but firm. "What makes you think your name decides your accountability?" For the first time, Ava blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected pushback. She hadn't expected calm resistance. She certainly hadn't expected kindness. A quiet fell over the room as the judge continued. "When people stand here, they stand as human beings, not titles." Ava's confidence cracked again, this time more visibly. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Her gaze fell for a moment to the floor, as if she were seeing something no one else could. Something she didn't want to face. Judge Caprio noticed. Everyone noticed. Because beneath the arrogance, beneath the bravado, beneath the 4 expensive jewelry pieces and the perfect posture, there was fear. There was loneliness. There was a girl carrying something she didn't know how to talk about. And that was the mystery no one saw coming. The story the world was about to witness wasn't about wealth. It was about identity, pressure, and a girl who finally met someone who could see the truth behind her armor. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and spoke softly. "Let's start from the beginning, Miss Harrington. Tell me what really happened." And in that moment, everything changed. The courtroom settled into an uneasy quiet as Ava Harrington shifted slightly at the podium. Her heels no longer clicked. They hesitated, unsure. It was as if the armor she wore so effortlessly had a crack forming right before everyone's eyes. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and waited patiently, the weight of his calm presence filling the room. Ava's father, Charles Harrington, sat at the back, arms folded, watching his daughter with a mix of pride and irritation. He was used to control. He was used to power. But here, in this courtroom, the rules weren't his. "Let's start from the beginning," Judge Caprio repeated softly. "Miss Harrington, tell me what really happened." Ava took a shallow breath. For the first time, she wasn't the girl who commanded attention with her entrance. She wasn't the daughter of a billionaire. She was just her. The words that came out were tentative, almost fragile. It wasn't supposed to happen," she admitted. Her voice faltered. "I didn't think anyone would care. I thought maybe I could just—" She stopped herself, her eyes darting toward her father. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was a silent pressure pushing her back into the persona she usually inhabited, confident, untouchable, untouchably rich. Judge Caprio didn't rush her. He let the silence stretch, giving her space to find the truth. I made a mistake," she continued, voice small now, almost a whisper. I was reckless. I wasn't thinking. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the shift. Ava Harrington, the girl who walked in as if she owned the place, was unraveling before them. And yet, she still tried to shield herself. What kind of mistake? Judge Caprio asked gently, his tone steady, not accusatory. Ava hesitated. She glanced at the officers, at the lawyers, at the reporters scribbling notes furiously. Then she exhaled, like letting go of a weight she'd been carrying alone. I took something that wasn't mine, she admitted, her words slicing through the tension. I didn't mean to. Her voice cracked. She crossed her arms instinctively, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. What? Judge Caprio prompted, leaning slightly forward. Ava's eyes welled up. She looked down at the podium, gripping it like a lifeline. Because everyone expects perfection from me, she whispered. Every move I make, every smile, every word, every step, it's all judged. All of it. And I can't breathe under that weight. I thought if I had a little control, even over something small, maybe I could. I don't know. The courtroom remained silent. Even her father seemed momentarily caught off guard. Ava's confession wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the pressure that had driven her to it. The audience saw it now. A girl suffocating under the invisible chains of expectation. Judge Caprio's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. Miss Harrington, pressure doesn't excuse choices, but it does explain them. You're human, not flawless, not untouchable, just human. Ava blinked, the words settling into her mind like a balm. She wasn't used to this kind of understanding. Not in her home, not in the world she navigated daily. People either worshipped her or criticized her. Few ever paused to see the girl behind the wealth. She swallowed hard. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought I could handle on my own. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Her voice trailed off. Judge Caprio didn't interrupt. He let her finish in her own time. Outside, the media waited like vultures, eager for the next soundbite. But in the courtroom, time seemed to slow. The story was no longer just about money, privilege, or a legal violation. It was about a young woman grappling with the impossible expectations placed upon her. Officer Daniels cleared his throat gently. Your Honor, I believe the items in question were recovered. There's no threat to public safety at this point. But, he paused, glancing at Ava. The circumstances suggest stress and personal pressure may have been factors. Judge Caprio nodded, acknowledging the comment, but keeping his focus on Ava. Thank you, officer. That context is helpful. Now, Miss Harrington, let's talk about the impact of your actions. How did this mistake affect you? Ava's hands trembled as she unclasped her designer bracelet. It felt heavy now, like the weight of expectation manifest in metal and diamonds. I realized I'm not invincible, she said quietly. I realized people, even my father, they don't see me. They see an image, a brand, a legacy. They don't see me, just me. Judge Caprio nodded. And that's why you stand here today, willing to take responsibility. Not just for the act itself, but for the person you've been carrying inside. Her father shifted in his seat. Charles Harrington had spent decades building an empire, constructing a world where everything was predictable, controlled, and admired. Yet, in this courtroom, his daughter's vulnerability exposed the cracks in his own perfectionist world. Ava's gaze met her father's for the first time. No words were exchanged, but the silent acknowledgement passed between them. She wasn't just his daughter. She was a person with fears, pressures, and choices, all her own. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, letting the moment sink in. Miss Harrington, he said softly, the story the world will hear is not about the wealth, the jewelry, or the name. It's about accountability, honesty, and courage. And right now, you've shown more courage than many people half your age or twice your age. Ava felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that she had spoken her truth. Fear of the consequences yet to come. But most importantly, she felt seen. And that was a sensation more powerful than any luxury item she had ever possessed. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted. Spectators leaned in, lawyers exchanged glances, and even the bailiffs seemed quieter. Ava Harrington, the girl who walked in commanding the room, had revealed the person behind the facade. Judge Caprio's voice carried gently over the room. Let's proceed carefully, step by step, truth by truth. This is not just about judgment. It's about understanding the person before me. And with that, the stage was set. Not for scandal, not for wealth flaunting, not for spectacle, but for a story about humanity, vulnerability, and a young woman's journey to confront the expectations and fears that had ruled her life. The courtroom, once a theater of judgment, had become a space of reflection, a place where Ava Harrington would begin to see herself clearly, and where the world might just glimpse who she really was. The courtroom's calm, reflective atmosphere didn't last long. As soon as Ava's admission settled in, the external world began to creep back in. Questions, murmurs, and the undeniable pressure of consequences. Her father, Charles Harrington, leaned forward now, his voice controlled but sharp. Ava, do you realize the gravity of what you've done? Ava swallowed hard, looking down at the polished wooden podium. Yes, I do, she said, voice steady but small. And I'm willing to face it. Charles's eyes narrowed. Willing? That's not enough. Your name carries weight. Your actions affect more than just you. You need to understand the impact on our reputation, on our business, on everyone who believes in this family. Ava flinched, not from his anger, but from the invisible chains of expectation tightening around her chest. It was one thing to admit she was human in front of Judge Caprio. It was another to hear it echoed back by the man whose approval she had spent her entire life chasing. Judge Caprio observed quietly. He could sense the storm brewing. Family dynamics, public scrutiny, legal ramifications, all converging in this single room. He chose his words carefully. Miss Harrington, he said, voice calm, the consequences of our actions often extend beyond ourselves. That is true, but the first responsibility is to acknowledge, understand, and learn from what has occurred. You've started that process. Now we address the next part, accountability. Ava nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her like this, firm, fair, and unwilling to be intimidated. Your Honor, the prosecuting attorney interjected, rising from her seat. While the personal context is noted, we cannot ignore the legal implications. Miss Harrington's actions could have severe consequences. Theft is theft, regardless of social standing. The law must be applied equally. Ava's heart raced. This was the part she feared most. The spotlight of judgment, the glare of the world's scrutiny. She had always believed wealth could shield her from accountability. Today it could not. Judge Caprio's gaze returned to her. Do you understand the seriousness of these proceedings? I do, Ava whispered, almost to herself. The courtroom tension escalated further as Officer Daniels brought in the evidence. Small, innocuous-looking items, but their symbolism was immense. They were tangible proof of a lapse in judgment, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of perfection. Ava's mind raced. She wanted to explain herself, to justify her actions, but every excuse sounded hollow. She had been reckless, and now she had to face the storm she'd invited. The murmurs of the spectators grew louder, the reporters scribbled faster, and even the bailiffs shifted uneasily. The stakes were no longer personal, they were public. Every detail would be dissected, every gesture analyzed. And then came the whispers from the gallery, the quiet but cutting remarks about privilege, entitlement, and how wealth could and should buy immunity. Ava felt their judgment like 1,000 pinpricks. She clenched her fists at the podium. The weight of expectation, fear, and shame collided inside her. She wanted to retreat, to hide behind the persona that had always protected her. But something in Judge Caprio's calm presence held her back. You may feel judged by the world, he said gently, but the most important judgment is your own. How will you face the truth? How will you take responsibility? Ava's fingers tightened around the podium. Her chest ached with the pressure of every decision she had ever made under the weight of her family's legacy. But in that moment, she realized something crucial. Accountability was not humiliation. It was strength. Her father's gaze bore into her again, silent but demanding compliance. Charles Harrington had built empires, acquired power, and commanded respect. But here, in this courtroom, he could not dictate the path. Ava spoke, voice trembling but growing steadier. I understand. I made a mistake. I know that. And I am willing to do what is necessary to correct it. The room seemed to exhale. The tension did not vanish, but the shift was tangible. This was no longer a story about arrogance or entitlement. It was a story of a young woman confronting her failings, facing judgment, and taking the first step toward redemption. Yet the conflict was far from over. The media presence ensured that every word, every pause, every expression would become fodder for public consumption. The legal system demanded answers. Her father demanded obedience. And deep inside, Ava demanded forgiveness from herself. The prosecuting attorney returned, papers in hand. We must consider the context, yes, but the law cannot bend for sentiment. Miss Harrington will need to demonstrate restitution, accountability, and a willingness to amend for her actions. Ava nodded again, though her throat was tight. She had never been in a position where acknowledgement was not enough. Here, action was required. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Miss Harrington, there's an opportunity here, not just to face consequences, but to understand the deeper truths of your choices. What pressures shaped them? What fears drove them? And how will you ensure they do not define the person you wish to be? Ava looked down at the podium. The silence was deafening. She thought of the expectations of her family, the media, the world, but most importantly, she thought of herself. Who was she without the diamond bracelets, the designer handbags, the name that everyone recognized? Her voice, quiet at first, began to find strength. I want to learn. I want to change. I don't want to be just a name or a brand. I want to be me. Even if that means admitting I was wrong. Even if that means facing consequences, I want to do better. The courtroom remained still. Judge Caprio's gaze softened, acknowledging both her courage and the magnitude of the journey ahead. Even her father seemed momentarily unmoored, realizing that the world he controlled could not shield her from personal growth. Officer Daniels nodded subtly. The prosecuting attorney made notes, silently recognizing the complexity beyond a simple legal case. This was not just about theft. It was about identity, pressure, and the human struggle for accountability. Judge Caprio's voice carried over the room, calm but decisive. Very well. We will proceed carefully, balancing justice with understanding. Miss Harrington, you have taken the first step, but the path ahead will challenge you. You must be honest, consistent, and courageous. Are you ready for that? Ava took a deep breath, her gaze lifting. Yes, Your Honor, she said, voice clear, unwavering. I'm ready. And in that moment, the conflict crystallized. The external pressures, law, media, family, society, were now intertwined with her internal battle. Fear, pride, and the struggle to find identity and integrity under scrutiny. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for judgment. It had become the arena where Ava Harrington would confront herself. Every glance, every word, every expectation would test her, and she would have to decide, retreat behind privilege or rise through accountability. The journey from arrogance to humility, from entitlement to self-awareness, from fear to courage. This was the heart of the conflict, and the audience, the world outside, would watch every step. Judge Caprio finally leaned back, allowing the room to breathe. Let us move forward step by step, truth by truth. Your actions will speak as loudly as your words. Ava exhaled, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The conflict was far from over, but for the first time, she felt a spark of control. Not the control she had known in wealth and status, but the control of owning her story, her mistakes, and her growth. And that was the beginning of her real challenge. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ava Harrington had admitted her mistake. She had confronted her fear, faced her father's expectations, and taken her first steps toward accountability. Yet the air was heavy with tension. Something was about to shift, something that would change the trajectory of the story entirely. Judge Caprio's gaze never wavered from Ava. He had seen countless cases, but he recognized when a moment held more than legal weight. It held transformation. "Miss Harrington," he said softly, "sometimes the truth is not only in what we admit, but in what we reveal when we are challenged." Ava's brow furrowed. She had thought the hardest part was admitting she was wrong, exposing her vulnerability. But she felt the weight of the judge's words like a ripple across water, an indication that something deeper was coming. The door at the back of the courtroom opened abruptly, and a young man entered, escorted by court officers. He was disheveled, nervous, and clearly out of place in the polished, quiet environment. Ava's heart skipped. She knew him. He was someone she had tried to forget, someone connected to the mistake she had just confessed, but she hadn't expected to confront him here, in front of everyone. "Your Honor," the officer said, "this witness insists on being present." Judge Caprio nodded, calm but alert. "Very well. Bring him forward." Ava's pulse quickened. She wanted to look away, to retreat behind the persona she had worn for years. But curiosity, and perhaps a sliver of courage, kept her eyes fixed on the approaching figure. The young man's gaze locked on hers. There was no fear, no admiration, no awe, only honesty. And in that honesty, Ava saw a reflection of herself stripped of all facades. "You're here," Ava whispered, almost to herself. "I am," he replied, voice steady despite the tension. "Because someone needs to know the consequences of their actions, not just the excuses." The courtroom grew silent. Even her father leaned forward, sensing that this was no ordinary moment of accountability. This was the confrontation her wealth and privilege had never prepared her for, a confrontation with reality. Judge Caprio spoke again, his tone gentle but firm. "Miss Harrington, the truth often demands more than words. It demands acknowledgement of impact. This is your chance." Ava swallowed hard. Her hands shook, her confidence wavered, but she knew she could not flee. "Not now." The young man stepped closer. "I trusted you," he said, voice low but carrying through the silent room. "And you took advantage. Not just of me, but of every system that should have been fair." Ava felt a cold wave of shame wash over her. This wasn't about her father, her name, or her wealth. This was about a human connection she had failed to honor. The enormity of the consequences hit her for the first time. I didn't think," she began, but her words faltered. What she had always believed, her power, her charm, her money, meant nothing here. She was just a person accountable for real harm. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression calm yet intense. "This is the moment of truth, Miss Harrington. How will you respond when confronted with the real impact of your actions?" Ava's chest tightened. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of every expectation, every privilege, every shield she had ever used crumble. When she opened them, she did not look for admiration or approval. She looked at the consequences. She looked at the truth. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking but sincere. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I wasn't thinking, and I—" The young man's gaze softened slightly, but the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. Ava realized that apology alone could not undo the past. She would have to act, to make restitution, to prove that her words carried meaning beyond privilege. Judge Caprio observed, knowing this was the pivot. "Miss Harrington, courage is not just in admitting mistakes. It is in taking responsibility that transforms both the self and those affected. Are you prepared to do that?" Ava took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." The tension in the courtroom shifted. The conflict had reached its peak. The external pressures of law, media, and family intersected with Ava's internal struggle. But in that intersection, something unexpected emerged: clarity. Ava saw herself not as a name, not as a brand, but as a person capable of growth, capable of accountability, capable of change. Her father, Charles Harrington, sat rigid, eyes fixed on his daughter. The power he wielded in the world meant little here. His empire could not shield her from this confrontation, nor could it dictate the lesson she would learn. The young man stepped back, nodding subtly, signaling a tentative recognition that Ava's acknowledgement was genuine. The courtroom seemed to exhale as the pivot became evident. The story was no longer about wealth, status, or scandal. It was about accountability, transformation, and the human capacity to face uncomfortable truths. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and spoke softly, almost to the room at large. In every case, the turning point is when a person sees themselves clearly. Miss Harrington, you have taken the first true step toward that understanding. The path ahead will not be easy, but it will be real. Ava's lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. Not the confident, untouchable smile she had worn on her entrance, but a tentative, honest one. For the first time, she felt a sense of control. Not the control of wealth or image, but the control that comes from facing the truth. And in that moment, the audience, her father, the officers, even the spectators, could see it. Ava Harrington was no longer a girl defined by status. She was a person defined by choice, integrity, and courage in the face of her own mistakes. The turning point had arrived, not with a dramatic gesture or a courtroom spectacle, but with the quiet, undeniable shift of accountability meeting self-awareness. Everything that followed would build on this moment. Every decision, every word, every action would now carry the weight of this revelation. And Judge Caprio, as always, remained the calm center of it all, guiding, observing, and witnessing the birth of transformation. The courtroom was quieter now, the tension replaced with a sense of reflection. Ava Harrington stood at the podium, her posture still elegant, but stripped of the armor she had carried for so long. She no longer needed to project perfection. The work, she realized, was not about appearances. It was about truth, responsibility, and the courage to face both. Judge Caprio observed her with a calm intensity, allowing her to gather herself before speaking again. Miss Harrington, you've faced the turning point. Now we must consider the resolution, not just of this case, but of your actions and their consequences. What steps will you take to make amends? Ava's eyes fell to the evidence laid out before her, the tangible reminders of the mistake that had brought her here. She thought of the young man she had hurt, the reputation she had jeopardized, and the expectations that had crushed her spirit for so long. I will do whatever it takes, she began, her voice steady now, stronger than before. I will return the items, cooperate fully with the process, and make restitution. But I want to learn, to understand why I acted the way I did, and to ensure it never happens again. Judge Caprio nodded approvingly. Acknowledgement and restitution are important, but understanding your actions, why they happened, and how to prevent repetition is what transforms accountability into growth. Her father, Charles Harrington, shifted in his seat. The man who had built empires, demanded obedience, and controlled narratives now listened quietly. He had always measured success by power, wealth, and influence. Today, he realized his daughter's success would be measured differently, by integrity, honesty, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Ava glanced at him briefly. I know I've disappointed you, she said softly, but I hope you can see that I'm trying, really trying to be better. Charles's expression softened ever so slightly. For the first time, the control he had spent decades asserting felt irrelevant. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the person before him was more important than the image he had helped construct. The young man from earlier watched silently. There was no cheer, no celebration, only recognition. Ava had faced him, acknowledged the harm she had caused, and committed to making things right. That alone spoke volumes. Judge Caprio's voice carried gently across the room. Miss Harrington, accountability is not punishment. It is opportunity, the chance to grow, to rebuild trust, and to live as a person who is seen for their choices, not their wealth. Ava inhaled deeply. The courtroom felt different now. She could sense a shift, not just in herself, but in everyone present. Spectators, lawyers, and officers alike were witnessing something rare. A young woman confronting her mistakes with honesty and courage. "Understand, Your Honor," she said, "and I promise I will not waste this chance. I will face the consequences and learn from them. I will become someone worthy of trust, someone who acts with integrity, even when no one is watching." Judge Caprio allowed a small, approving nod. That is all anyone can ask. It is far more than most accomplish in a lifetime. The tension eased, though the weight of responsibility remained. Ava realized this wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning. The resolution wasn't a neat conclusion, but a commitment to a new path. Every action she took from this moment forward would be guided by the understanding she had gained. Her father finally spoke, voice measured but sincere. "Ava, I see you. Not just as my daughter, but as a person. And that is all I could ask for." Ava felt a rush of emotion. She had feared judgment, rejection, and disappointment. Instead, she found understanding, guidance, and a path forward. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it was real. Officer Daniels, standing near the back, gave a subtle nod of respect. Even the prosecuting attorney paused, noting the genuine change in demeanor, the accountability that had replaced arrogance. Judge Caprio addressed the courtroom one last time. "This case will be resolved according to the law, but the real resolution lies in the lessons learned and the character revealed. Miss Harrington has shown courage, honesty, and a willingness to grow, qualities far more enduring than any inheritance or title." Ava exhaled, a mixture of relief and determination washing over her. She had walked into this courtroom as a girl cloaked in privilege and facade. She would leave as someone more than that, a young woman who had faced her flaws, accepted responsibility, and begun the journey toward authenticity. The courtroom began to stir. Spectators whispered, reporters scribbled, and yet the moment lingered. Ava looked around, taking in the faces, not for approval, but for perspective. The world outside was still the world, but she had discovered something more vital: her own capacity for growth and accountability. Judge Caprio concluded softly, "Miss Harrington, go forward with honesty, integrity, and the courage to face yourself every day. That is the truest measure of character." Ava's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. She had learned that strength was not in control, wealth, or image. Strength was in facing the truth, in embracing vulnerability, and in taking responsibility, even when it was hard, even when it was public. As she stepped away from the podium, the courtroom seemed to release its collective breath. Ava Harrington had crossed the threshold from fear to courage, from arrogance to self-awareness. And though challenges awaited beyond these walls, she now had the tools and the heart to meet them. The story of that day would not be one of scandal, wealth, or entitlement. It would be a story of human growth, of learning from mistakes, and of the extraordinary courage it takes to confront oneself honestly. Ava Harrington had fallen, and in that fall, she had begun to rise. The gavel struck softly, but its echo felt like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, final. Ava Harrington stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, her mind replaying the journey she had just taken. From arrogance to accountability, from fear to courage, the transformation was undeniable. Judge Caprio looked at her, calm and unwavering. "Remember, Miss Harrington, it is not the mistakes we make that define us, but how we respond to them." Ava nodded. She had always measured herself by wealth, titles, and appearances. Today, she measured herself differently, by honesty, by courage, by the strength to face the truth. Her father, Charles Harrington, remained silent for a moment, then gave a subtle nod. No words were needed. Recognition and understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement that went deeper than privilege or reputation. The courtroom began to empty, the hum of whispers and footsteps filling the space. But Ava lingered for a moment, taking in the gravity of what had just occurred. She had faced judgment, confrontation, and truth, all without the shield she had relied on for years. This was more than resolution. It was a beginning, a chance to live authentically, to make amends, and to carry the lessons forward into every decision she would make. Judge Caprio's voice followed her gently, almost like a guiding hand. Go forward with integrity, and remember the person you choose to be matters far more than the name you carry. Ava took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity, purpose, and freedom. The world outside would still be full of expectations, scrutiny, and pressure, but she now knew how to face it, honestly, bravely, and with accountability. She turned, stepping toward the exit, her heels clicking, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. The courtroom had witnessed more than a legal case. It had witnessed a transformation. And for anyone watching her story unfold, one truth became clear. No matter who you are, no matter the weight of expectations or mistakes, real strength comes from facing the truth and having the courage to rise from it. The story ends here, but the lesson lasts forever.